All right. Well, here we are. At
Here we
long,
are again,
at long
finally,
last.
after the long-awaited return of the Northern Horde Productions. Yeah, it's been a while, but good to be back doing it again.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, it's I'm glad we've finally. I'm just glad we're finally here again. So,
Getting on it, yeah.
yeah,
Hopefully, teething problems largely resolved, and we'll be a little bit more regular from now on. It's been a strange couple of months, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So I've just noticed, Connor.
yeah.
You're not sharing screen with me on Skype. That's fine. I don't think that's going to be a problem because I'm obviously going to be presenting my own presentation today, which means I need to follow it on my side anyway because there's a little bit of a lag sometimes with the YouTube and all of that.
Oh,
Um,
I I thought I was doing the presentation, and you would just be like
that's what I mean. Yeah. That's what I mean. But there's a little bit of don't worry about it. Anyway, basically, I'll tell you when to go next slide and all that kind of stuff. And I haven't done any fancy click through things or any of the stuff that I have tried before. It's all just plain. So I'll just say next slide or something when it's time for the next one.
okay, and you've disappeared.
I've disappeared.
Yeah, yeah.
God, I love it. It's great.
Right. Well, shit.
Everything works until you need it to.
Yes. Okay, doke. Right. I'm gonna share screen with you.
He's back.
He's back. How?
I'm back.
Wait. How's? I see. That's okay. He's disappeared again.
I'm gone.
Right.
Shit.
I'm just gonna share the screen here, and hopefully that will do. No, you're still disappeared. I'm gonna need to.
Ah, I can now see that. Oh, wow. And there I am. That's a huge me on my screen, at least.
Yep. Right. I'm just gonna come out of Skype. Open Skype again. Right. Share screen. There we go. Right.
We got it. Good,
That's that
good.
fixed.
Hello, everybody. I am here. Not a mirage.
Okie doke. So here we go.
Here we go.
Right.
You tell me when it's up. Is it up?
We'll see in a second. There we are. Right.
Where we are. Right. A twist in the tale. This is it might end up being a series if I find other weird kind of things like this in the future. But for now, this is a kind of standalone piece. Basically, I'm going to be talking about a text called Cath Mytura, which is part of Irish mythology. And what I've put here, Celtic confusions. I mean, there are confusions in lots and lots of different bodies of mythology, but we've seemed to have found that Celtic and especially Irish mythology has got some really strange kind of layering going on and just odd stuff where it can be very difficult to kind of follow, and there's lots of kind of contradictions between different texts and things like that. So I found some really interesting things looking into some of this stuff towards the beginning of this year, actually, and I really want to talk about this one in particular because I think it's important from a kind of like mythological perspective to think about how myths change over time and what that means about humans and society and all sorts of stuff like that. So if we go on to the next slide, the main kind of focus that I have for this is on these two figures, Brez and Bridget. Actually, mostly Brez for this one because there's really not that much lore-wise that's recorded about Bridget. There's loads of gaps about who she was, how she came about, what she was associated with. We know some general things. We have obviously like Christian lore associated with Saint Bridget, which is maybe a similar figure, maybe related, maybe the same figure, maybe, I don't know. But I'm mostly going to be talking about Brez because we have a few sources on Brez, and only one of them is really exhaustive, and that is the Cath Moitura. But the problem is that this text, Cath Moitura, which most, even today, scholars and sort of Irish Reconstructionists, they seem to take their prevailing view of Bress from this text, which makes a lot of sense because it is fully fleshed out. It's a consolidated story. It all kind of makes sense, and yeah, why not? But I hope that by the end of this presentation, people will kind of step back from the depiction of him that's given in this text and think, oh, hang on a minute, maybe there's some other things going on here. So there you go, a couple of images of Bress and Bridget, who, if people don't know, are supposedly married, and that's why I'm presenting them together here. If I do another one of these, it might be about Bridget, for example, because there is some very interesting stuff that we can glean about her figure, not from texts in her case, but more from sort of place associations and some other kind of things that seem to suggest things about her that aren't necessarily in texts. Anyway, let's go on to the next slide. And I'm going to try and get through this kind of quickly because I've got a bit of a time limit today. But we're talking about this story, Cath Moitura. Do you want to give a brief summary of this, or do you want me to give a brief summary of it?
I've not read it. So.
Oh, that's all right. That's fine. Okay, I'll go through it very quickly. Long story short, there's actually two texts that tend to be called Cath Moitura, but there's one in particular that is generally, that's the main Cath Moitura, and the other one is sort of, it's got other names. We'll see later on, because I do talk about that one too. But the main Cath Moitura is a story about a Cath, a battle that happens on Moitura. That's the plain of Tira. I can't remember what Tira means. And it's a story about how the Tuatha Danann, which people are probably familiar with, are the gods of pagan pre-Christian Ireland. They have a bit of a war with people called the Fomorians, who are presented in this text as sort of like demonic, monstrous beings from the north, essentially, which maybe is Scotland, I don't know. But at any rate, this text, the version that we've got now, opens with a brief discussion of the first battle of Moitura, which is a different battle entirely, happening in a completely different place that still happens to be called Moitura for some reason. And the first battle of Moitura was when the Tuatha Danann turned up in Ireland for the first time, and the Fir Bolg were already in Ireland, and there were some discussions between them, and eventually it came to conflict, and they had this battle of Moitura in which the Tuatha Danann won, and they arranged the kind of, how they were going to divide up the land between the Fir Bolg and the Tuatha from then on. So that's already happened at this point, and the text kind of describes this very briefly. During this first battle of Moitura, the Tuatha king, called Nuada, he is wounded terribly. He loses his hand. And there was this old thing in the Celtic, well, in the old Irish belief system, I guess, that a wounded king was no good thing. You can't have a king with a blemish, a physical blemish. It's bad juju, right? So he loses the kingship because of this wound, and they kind of cast about for, well, okay, who's a good person to be a king? And there's this guy called Bress, and he's very comely. He's a good-looking chap. Everybody knows he's kind of nice. He's friendly with everybody, and people are like, yeah, Bress will be good. And there's another thing, which is that Bress is half Fomorian, right? So there's already some kind of thing about, there's a bit of, there's a tense situation maybe between the Fomorians and the Tuatha Danann. That's not really explained. It just sort of is the case, and readers at the time are expected to know that, I guess. Now, Bress's parentage has gone into, and they talk about how his father, Elatha, is a Fomorian, and his mother, Eriu, which literally means Ireland, is of the Tuatha Danann. So he's sired by Elatha. Elatha turns up on a ship, and he's the most beautiful man that Eriu's ever seen. And he kind of comes on shore, sees her, and they're in love immediately, just like that. And, they have their dalliance, and the product is Bress. And Elatha, I think he gives Eriu a ring and tells Eriu, don't tell my son about his parentage. Don't tell anybody. Just have him and bring him up as one of your own, as Tuatha, and give him this ring at some point if he needs to find out who his real father is and all that kind of stuff. And then he buggers off over to Scotland or wherever the Fomorians come from, and that's kind of that for a while. Well, Brest grows up and everybody comes to like him, and there's this whole first battle of Moitura, and then Nuada's lost the kingship, and everybody's thinking, who's going to be the next king? Why not make it this guy, Eriu's son? Yeah, he's great. He's, again, very beautiful, nice guy, whatever. They make him king, and as you can see, he was a terrible king. He's greedy, I think. He kind of doesn't distribute wealth very well. Whenever the Tuatha Dé Danann come to visit him in his halls, you're supposed to be as a king, you're supposed to host people and do a kind of, parties and provide music and feasts and things like that. He doesn't really do any of that. He's kind of cheaps out on the wine and the mead and whatever else they're drinking. I don't know. The food is not very good. There's no kind of song or entertainment. In fact, because of this terrible treatment of guests, Brez is subject in Cath Moitura, in this text, he's subject to the first satire in Ireland. They make quite a big point about this, that whichever figure it is, one of the Tuatha Dé Danann kind of gets up at the end of one of these failed feasts, and he's basically like, look, you've not given us good food, you've not given us good drink, you're a piece of shit, basically. And so, basically, very quickly, nobody likes him. The other thing is that instead of distributing wealth among the Tuatha Dé, he's actually been sending it off to the Fomorians. He's been supplementing his kin over the waters using the fruits of the labor of the Tuatha Dé Danann, which is bollocks. Like, that's awful. Don't do that. So long story short, the Tuatha Dé get rid of Brez. They're like, we're not happy with this guy. Fuck him off. Send him back where he's come from. He gets the ring from Eriu, and she says, Elatha of the Fomorians is your father. Go to him. He will help you. So Brez goes to Elatha and says what's happened. And Elatha says, well, you're a cock-up, son. That's a terrible way to... That's not how you be a king. I'm not going to help you with that. But you can go to my father, Balor, and he might help you out. So Brez goes to Balor, the evil-eyed, one-eyed Balor with a big kind of... Apparently 4 men have to lift the lid of his eye, and when they do, sort of bale fire comes out of it and annihilates anything that it looks upon. So this is very like a demonic figure. Brez goes to Balor and he says, here, Grandad, they've chucked me out of my kingdom. I kind of want it back. And Balor's like, well, you didn't do a very good job of being a king, but since you're my kin and I feel like having a crack at the Tuatha Dé Danann, yeah, why not? He gets all the Fomorians together. They go down to Ireland and they have the second Battle of Moitura, which is this particular Cath Moitura, during which there's been this whole episode of Nuada had because his hand had been cut off. Dian Cecht, the healer of the gods, had fashioned a silver arm to replace his kind of, dismembered hand. But it wasn't working very well. In one text, it's referred to as beetle-ridden, which suggests that it was kind of rotting and not very good. Yeah. It's not great.
That's such an ill image. Just your hand just oh god. Yeah, it's
not the guy that you want to be king over you, right? The guy with the rotten hand. No. So Dian Cecht's son or sons plural, I forget, fashioned a real hand for him out of like cow bone or something. I can't remember, pig bone or something. So he's raised to be king again, and he fights. I've forgotten to mention as well, the character of Lugh comes up. Lugh of the long arm. I can't remember which one this is. Yeah. But he, unlike Brez, is the progeny of a Tuatha Dé father and a Fomorian mother. So he's like a counterpart to Brez. He's like the other side of the equation, right? He becomes, like the big hero among the Tuatha Dé Danann after Brez is gone. And they have this battle, the second Battle of Moitura, Balor and the Fomorians with Brez in tow, and Nuada with Lugh and the Tuatha Dé Danann, and they fight each other. Nuada dies. Balor supposedly dies, although that's questionable according to other texts.
Okay.
Brez survives. He's captured during the battle, and he's confronted by Lugh near enough when it's all over, when they're about to kind of start mopping up. The Tuatha Dé win. They're going to start mopping up the Fomorians, and Lugh confronts Brez and says, all right, what are you going to give me then if I spare your life? And Brez says, I can give you stuff like cows that are forever in milk, and you can milk them whenever you need, and you'll always get milk, or like fields that are always ripe and they can always be harvested, stuff like that. And the Tuatha Dé kind of talk among themselves and like, nah, that's not good enough. Give us something else. So, I know, not like eternal cow milk. Like, that's amazing, but apparently it's not good enough for them. So in the end, what they get from him is the secrets of when to plow, when to sow, and when to reap. So agricultural secrets, and because it's about the time, it's also suggesting astronomical or astrological secrets. And he exchanges this information. I don't know how they managed to survive without this knowledge in the first place, but they get this stuff from him and they let him go. And that is kind of the story in Kath Moitura. That's where it ends with them, mopping up the rest of the Fomorians, and everybody was happy thereafter, more or less, apart from all the other horrible things that happen in Irish mythology. So that's kind of this text. This is by far the fullest, most in-depth story that we have about most of these figures, actually. But some of them are mentioned in other bits of lore, like the Dagda's mentioned. Obviously, Nuada's got some stories associated with him. There is a text that deals with the first battle of Moitura between the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Firbolg. In fact, there's a couple of texts that do that. But this is by far like the most composite together, sensible text that we've got discussing, especially Brez. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to kind of show. Yeah, so this is like where things happen.
Alex, I have a couple of things to add just before we go on to the next slide.
Yeah, sure.
So the just questions and stuff like that. So
sure, yeah.
What was the other thing that you said that Bress offered them? So it was cows that give forever milk, and what was the other thing?
I think it was something like fields that are forever fertile or forever ripe. Like you can harvest them again and again and again. It's one of these weird things in Irish mythology. There's lots of stuff where they play with time, and it's like okay, so the ripening of a field should take months and months and months once you've already sown the crop, right? But it's something like, oh, it's just going to be ripe. You harvest it. The next day it's ripe again. And you can harvest it again. And then the next day. Very magical. Very strange.
Okay. That's interesting. It just reminds me of like there's Middle Eastern mythological motifs. So you know how you've got in the Bible at the very start, you've got like the tree of knowledge, which God tells Adam not to eat from. But he says you can have anything from any of the other trees, which implies, for example, the tree of life. And it makes me think of the things that Bress offers them. It's also
eternal succor.
Yeah.
You're never going to go hungry again.
Yeah. It's in Babylonian mythology as well. There's a myth about this man, Adapa. He's the son of Ea, the creator of man. And he long story short, he does he commits a crime and he ends up going to see Anu, the chief of the gods, and Anu offers him this like food of life, basically. But he chooses not to take it because Ea was jealous and told him not to. So he just.
Oh yeah, I think I remember this story.
Yeah. He says, "Oh, take everything else," and Adapa takes like the oil and the vestments and all the like external stuff. But I think actually the Bible is possibly more similar to this. I don't know if that would have maybe even had an influence on the because obviously these stories were written by monks. So
exactly, we will get into that. Don't worry. Not too deeply, but I will talk at some point about biblicisms and this kind of stuff, and how if you know the Bible very, very well, then you can probably point out things which, at best, you could say that they were common between the Irish law as it was and biblical law as it came out of the Middle East. But it's probably more likely that it was just stuff that they took from the Bible and put into their old myths when they were rewriting them at this point.
It's one of those things. It's quite hard to know, like because there's strange parallels between Norse mythology and Middle Eastern mythology, and I don't think that those parallels are to do with the fact that the people that wrote down the myths were Christian. I think they maybe have like a deeper root, like pastoralism or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have talked before about how when you start comparing what they've reconstructed of sort of Proto-Indo-European mythology and sort of Proto-Semitic mythology, there are extraordinary parallels with all the kind of storm god stuff, the general hierarchy of pantheons, and how different forces in the world are supposed to be related to each other. there is a lot of comparison to be made between Indo-European and Semitic cultures. So I'm with you. I think some of this stuff probably goes that far back. I mean, one thing I'll say about the Irish stuff, we'll get into it because I think a key issue is that there's layering going on, and that there's different interpretations at different times, which have significant effects on how things are remembered going forward. And then even sort of like reversions at certain points where stories have swung one way for centuries and then somebody swings it another way for one set of reasons or another.
Yeah. So it's interesting just that Bress is like, so he offers them these like eternal things as like, you can have this forever, but they choose the like, no, we want like the knowledge.
The knowledge.
Yeah. So that
we don't want fish. We want to be taught how to fish.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Very, very interesting.
Just a couple more points I wanted to add. Just the Fomorian's stronghold, or at least Balor's stronghold. You meant have you come across Tory Island?
It's in the next slide. Don't worry. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the thing about Lou, and him being Balor's grandson.
Yes, because Lou's mother is it Ethnu or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's also a fascinating figure because, well, we'll get into some of we'll talk a little bit about some of the genealogical confusions.
Okay.
Because it's impressive how messed up everybody's relations with everybody else is. Really impressive when you get through all of the texts, when you look at all of extant Irish law as it was written down.
Yeah.
My God, you'd be. I mean, wow. Yeah. Talk about extra chromosomes.
I see Tory Island there. Yeah.
Yeah, so here we are with the map. This is a sort of map of roughly where people think things happened. If you see kind of just to the left of the middle of the map, there's a place called Battle Site. That's where the second Battle of Moytura supposedly happened. Way up at the top there, you've got Tory Island, home of Balor. We've got some other things like down in the southwest there, Fort of Bress, which was built for him by Balor. And you kind of wonder how they had the time to build Bress a fort in Ireland when they were at war with the Tuatha Dé Danann and whatever. I mean, time is really weird in a lot of these stories. It doesn't work the way that time works in waking life. So this is just to give people a little bit of an idea of sort of the lay of things, and to explain that a lot of this stuff is happening in really north and northwestern Ireland. It's really northwestern Ireland, isn't it?
Right.
Which is interesting for some other kind of subsequent connections between this story and other texts that we'll see. So if we then go on to the next slide, there are some problems with this text that we've got, Cath Moytura. Number one, where is Bridget in all of this? She is mentioned, I think, once in the context of the actual battle when the Fomorians are fighting the Tuatha Dé Danann. Brigid's son by Bress, called Ruadan, is killed in the battle. He was fighting for the Fomorians, despite having a Tuatha Dé mother and a half Tuatha father. He's fighting alongside the Fomorians and he's killed. And Brigid, in this instance, so we had the first satire that was targeting Bress. And now here, when Brigid's son dies, we have the first what's called keening, which is a particular kind of lamentation. I think in the text, I think it's described as hissing, but the kind of hissing that a sword swipe or an arrow flying might make. They're very interesting. The imagery is very much to do with battle, which is interesting for a figure like Brigid because she's usually associated with poetry, healing, smithing, and generally sovereignty. She's not a war goddess like Morrigan or some of the other ones, Badbull, Maeve, or whatever. So that's kind of interesting that this story really doesn't treat Brigid much at all. And yet, from what we can tell about these two, Bress and Brigid are a sort of fixed couple. There's a strong tradition in Irish and I think also in Welsh law of emphasizing sort of divine couples in a way, and that there's a sovereignty goddess that is often three goddesses actually, and then a sort of kingly figure who is the masculine counterpart who represents the actual physical king being wed to the spirit of the land. That's what the goddess of sovereignty represents. And so obviously you've got to imagine in marriage, spouses are supposed to treat each other well, and the idea is, well, if the king treats the land well, the land will treat the king well, and that's going to be good for the people. And so this is a model for how to be a good king in ancient Ireland. And the fact that Brez and Bridget are, even in this story, it's affirmed, yes, they are wedded and they have children and everything, kind of suggests that Brez's sort of kingly role was maybe originally a little bit more proper than how he's presented here in this text. There's a few other inconsistencies. I put here continuity errors in this story. So Elatha says to Eriu, don't tell anybody that I'm his father. And yet one of the reasons why Bress is picked to be king when Nuada's wounded is because he's half Fomorian. But he only finds this out after he's already been king. So hang on a minute. Yeah, they decided to make Brez the king because part of it was to increase, have a good pact with the Fomorians and the Tuatha Dan. It just didn't work out like that because Brez favoured the Fomorians in this text. So, yeah, a little bit of confusion like that. I'm sure that there's some other things that I think there's some discrepancies between the very first introductory bit and subsequent bits. I've said here, Cathmoitura compounds and confounds multiple sources, partially because I think modern scholarship says that the first bit that talks about the first Battle of Moitura with the Firbolg, that was added to this text at a later date to try and give a bit of context, but they kind of took it from sources that are a little bit confusing compared to how the story ends up going. So, there's some problems there. Brez is treated worse in this text than any other failed king in all of Irish mythology. There's Conchobar, there's the Dagda, there's at least one other that I can remember who all, one way or another, they are good kings for a time and then they make some mistakes and things go badly. But in those other texts, it's kind of just accepted like, yeah, I mean, being a perfect king is impossible. And you're always going to be faced with circumstances where you can't be a perfect king. But in this text, it's just like, no, Brez is bad. There's no explanation given. It's not because of the circumstances. He's just a bad king. And, the less we deal with that, the better, to be honest, as far as the story is concerned, because things can move along a little bit quicker. But the most important thing for me is here at the bottom. Cathmoitura conflicts with other texts, which, as I've already said, are nowhere near as exhaustive, nowhere near as descriptive. They don't go into as much depth. But some of these are like old school poetry, which texts like Cathmoitura are based on. So it's kind of like how if the prose Edda go against the poetic Edda, you might prefer the poetic Edda because that's apparently not Snorri's own work, whereas the prose Edda is Snorri's work, piecing it together from the poetry that he knows. So it's that kind of thing where even though in terms of like manuscripts or something, some of these other texts come from literally later, bodies of work, but they might reflect earlier traditions. So yeah, let's go on to the next slide and start talking about some of these other texts then. The main one that I would point out is something called, and this is a really interesting. This goes into showing some of the confusion in all of this lore. This Carnhui Nate, which literally means the grave of the grandson of Nate. This is from the Dinsenchus, which is the lore of places, as in stories to do with places. Carnhui Nate, a place in Ireland. You can go there today, and it is associated in Irish folklore with the burial, the cairn, the cairn of Brez, who is in this text the Hui Nate. He's the grandson of this figure called Nate, who is sort of like an ancient war god. It was so ancient that I think there's really very little about this character. He's an older figure than Dagda and Nuada and all that lot. So in this text, Bress is, and I'm just going to read this out, kindly and noble. He's the flower of the Tuatha Dé, not the Fomorians. Alternatively, he's the chosen of the Tuatha Dé. It depends on how you translate the particular word, but definitely like, you know, special and really prized. He's prized among the Tuatha Dé Danann, not the Fomorians. He's gifted with excellences like Dagda, the good god or the god of skills, like Lu, who is also called the skilled god. He's a master of love spells, which, okay, that might be good or bad depending on how you read that. He is the ornament of the host, so he's very comely to look at, and he's also he's the kind of, I think there's some reference in Roman literature about the Gauls picking handsome generals because men want to follow. Oh, and even among the Greeks, that it's a good idea to pick good-looking men to lead other men into war because it inspires people to think, look, here's a perfect human specimen. You know, this is the guy that we're behind, and something like that. He's called the spear-attended king, so people like him and rally to his banner and fight for him. In this text, unlike in Kathmaitura, where he survives at the end of the Second Battle of Waitura, in this text he is killed by a figure called Nechten, who could be Nuada, we don't know. It could be a Fomorian. It's not very clear. He's called, I think in English, his epithet is tax hand. So the implication is that he's always happy to kind of receive money from people, or crops, probably, as it were, or cattle, or whatever the tax was. Nechten basically convinces Lu to trick Brez, who is under Aegeus. For anybody who doesn't know this aspect of Irish mythology, Aegeus is like a kind of, it's somewhere between like a charm and a curse, and it's a sort of something that you have to hold yourself to, and if you don't, then bad things happen. Brez is under Aegeus that he has to accept any hospitality that's offered him, no matter what it is. So Lu does this thing where he kind of kills all the cows, and he makes wooden cows. And in this version, the Canhui Nate version, he fills them with a red liquid, which people interpret as being like bog sludge, basically. It's sort of nasty stuff that you don't want to drink. And he offers Bress drafts of this bog sludge milked from the fake cows, and Bress, being under the Aegeus, has to accept, and he does so courageously, and even perhaps with humour, good humour, and like, you know, well, I have to, so I'm going to anyway, and it kills him. So, and this poem, Canhui Nate, laments Brez's death, saying this guy was so good. Everybody loved Brez. He was a fantastic king. He was a great leader. Everybody flocked to his banner, and if only these guys hadn't got him basically assassinated in a weird way. But that's how it went. Hey ho, you know, sad. Go and visit his grave. That's kind of what it's saying. Any questions about that, or?
I suppose the figure of Nechten or Nate is interesting. Like they have kind of similar names.
They do. They're definitely different figures. As far as I can work out, Nate should be dead by this point, whereas Nechten is obviously alive. I agree, though, that there's a lot of confusion about who this Nechten person is supposed to be, especially considering that most figures in Irish lore called Nechten are female, apparently. Whereas this one is definitely a dude. So
it's a women's name for other characters.
Yeah.
Oh, I always assumed, because I know the Pictish there's Pictish kings called Nechten.
Yeah, Pictish Nechten is male. But apparently in Ireland, it's often a female name. It's because the root necht means like pure or clear or something like that. And so the Irish thought that it was feminine. I don't know. But this one is definitely a man. But, you know, you'd have to assume because he's sort of a king and he's collecting taxes from people. I don't think women tended to collect taxes back in pre-Christian Ireland somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, actually, maybe, because you do have like queens referred to in some of the texts, so could be, I don't know. At any rate, a bit of skullduggery going on there. It's definitely the sense is that Nechten wants Bress dead because Bress is popular. Nechten is like a kind of high ruler, whereas Bress is more of what is it, Tua, like a prince. Like a chief of a big group, but not like a king. That's,
I think a Tuath is like I think it's the smallest unit of kingship. It's just like the local kind of tribe.
All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay.
So
well, there you go. So clearly we've got quite a distinction between this depiction of Bress as, for one, a lowly king, not a high king, but also very well loved compared to Kath Moitura. He's high king, and pretty quickly everybody hates him because he's crap at the job. Very, very different treatments. I just want to do a little segue briefly, talking about how confused some of this lore can be, and talk about Hui Nate. If we go to the next slide, we'll see again this map of Ireland, and you'll see this Tory Island, home of Balor, right up at the top there. In other traditions, Ui Nate, the grandson of Nate, is Balor. And it is Balor who is buried at the place called Carn Hui Nate. Not only was he buried there, but he was actually possibly killed there, and he was killed using the wooden cattle trick. So there's real confusion between Balor and Bress in these stories. If you go to the next slide, this is the bit that really floored me a bit. The next slide, with the little red arrow down at the southwesternmost tip of Ireland, that tiny promontory there, that is Carn Hui Nate.
Oh, I was going to ask. Right, okay. Yeah. Okay.
So the long story short, it would appear to be that either Balor was killed in the Battle of Moitura, way up there in northwest Ireland, and they took his body all the way down there to build a cairn for him. Why? Or alternatively, Bress was killed when visiting Lugh with the fake cow juice, and he was buried there, even though obviously his fortress is up in northwest Ireland, and everywhere that's associated with Bress or Balor is up in the north. For some reason, the place called Carn Hui Nate, which they associate with Balor and or Bress, is here in southwest Ireland.
Right.
Why? This is so confusing to me.
I do find it interesting, just the, I suppose, like, the range of the lore. I mean, it all seems to be on the West Coast at the very least, so I don't know if that said anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a little bit before about, there's this episode in the lore where the Firbolg come over from Britain to help fight in a battle, I think, against the Fomorians. They are instrumental in the Second Battle of Moitura. And there's some suggestion that they do still just live in Eastern Ireland.
Western Ireland.
Oh no, the Firbolg live in Western Ireland. Right. Okay. Yeah. I haven't got a clue what's supposed. This is why I call this Celtic confusions, because what the fuck is going on? Why is everybody everywhere?
Well, it's I suppose the Firbolg, they would have come from Britain, but because the Tuatha De Danann, they came from the north, and the north part of the world, which is a very interesting kind of vague reference, like, but it would imply that they had come from Scotland at the very least, like, to Ireland.
I think, yeah.
And the Firbolg, they just got pushed into I think County Galway, which is that's at the very top of this map here.
This map here,
yeah.
Which, funnily enough, County Galway, the fortress of Bress is not far. It's just to the west there, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. I'll go back actually. Yeah,
it's right there. So the fort of Bress is built in Firbolg territory. Both battles of Moitura. I mean, the first one, of course, it would happen in Firbolg territory. That kind of makes sense. It was all Firbolg territory before the Tuatha turned up. But then the second battle of Moitura also happens in Firbolg territory, instead of where the Tuatha Danann set themselves up. Very confusing.
Yeah.
Let's continue on past the Carn Hui Nate map to the next slide. Connor, do you want to try and pronounce this?
Let's see. Oi.
Yeah.
Oidhia Chlinia Turin.
Thank you very much. I tried and couldn't.
I think that's how it's pronounced. Yeah, I mean, that's Gaelic for you.
That is Gaelic for you. It translates into English as something like the fate or the tragedy of the children of the sky Turin. I'm not going to pronounce any of this properly. This is yet another piece of lore that contradicts Cath Moitura, the text Cath Moitura, really strongly. In this story, it's more or less, this story kind of starts halfway through the events of the main Cath Moitura text. Lu is preparing for the battle against the Fomorians, and these children of Turin, for various reasons I won't go into, he's charging them to find these sort of magical items that might help him to beat the Fomorians. So they have to go around different parts of Ireland and even beyond Ireland to get this stuff, and it's all to help Lu fight the Fomorians. So all this kind of context is already in place, but the circumstances that led to conflict between the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fomorians are completely different, because in this story, it's not Brez who had this sort of tax imposed on the Tuatha Dé Danann where it's all going after the Fomorians. It was imposed under Nuada's kingship. Nuada's a kind of craven figure in this. He's totally kind of browbeaten by the Fomorians. He doesn't want to go against them at all. He actually tries to convince Lu not to fight them and let's just keep paying the tax, please. So here, Nuada is the one who's he's got the failed king role, as opposed to Brez and Cath Moitura. Brez does turn up in this story, but he's not of the Tuatha Dé Danann at all. I think have I written it here? Yeah, he's Balor's son. So there's no, Elatha's not involved here, and we'll find out why in a bit. He's not king of the Tuatha Dé Danann. He's not the son of Eriu. He is captured again at the end of the battle, which again this contradicts Carn Hui Nate, where he's killed by Lu. So none of these texts agrees with each other. But in this text, he offers the sun and the moon, the sea and the land. So effectively everything to Lu in return for his life. And some scholars suggest that this is sort of a reflection of like some of these stories are associated with like harvest myths and things like that. And people think that it might be to do with the relationship between the folk and the kind of grain-giving god, the god of fecundity. And so it's like a ritual sacrifice of the grain god to try and assure the next year's harvest or something like that. So this sort of, offering of all these things, this might play into a kind of yearly cyclical pageant or festival or something, where they have like a mock kind of battle, and then they capture the grain god, I guess, or this particular figure, and instead of killing him as they do in some other cultures, they spare him, but in return for sort of mortal dominion over the terrestrial plane. Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Any thoughts or?
Only about the thing about like the grain god. There's this book called Food of the Gods, where this guy talks about these cults in the Middle East that kind of like they eat the grain god. So like with the bread representing like the god and stuff like that. It's like bread and the wine, and it even figures into Jesus and that sort of thing. So
and we've got things like shaving, for example.
Yeah.
Shield shaving, all this kind of stuff in the Anglo-Saxons, in the Germanic sphere. There's a few. What's the one? Jack in the Green.
Okay.
It's the more up-to-date folkloric version, who I don't think is necessarily a sacrificial figure anymore. I forget some of this folklore stuff because I've been doing too much mythology and things. But yeah, there are parallels here with other traditions, clearly, and it seems like it is sort of, if we want to read the whole Cath Moitura this Fomorian Tuatha Dé Danann conflict as a sort of, how Varg Vikernes says that Ragnarok was like a yearly ritual to do with the winter solstice.
Yeah.
Yeah, but some people have suggested that this is what's happening with at least with the second Battle of Moitura. I don't know about the first one, but there's because some of these elements were kind of retained in local festivals going on through into the modern period. I think even there's some things where, depending on how you read it, figures in these kinds of festivals might represent like Ruadan, the son of Brez that gets slain, or it might be Brigid, or it could be somebody else. I don't know, but some of it might be a bit of a long reach. I don't know. I was just reading what other people have said, and there seems to be a bit of there was a trend to try and interpret this stuff like that. I don't know. I personally, I take it mostly as mythology at this point. Certainly trying to talk about some kind of, I don't know, metaphysical relationship maybe, or a kind of metacultural relationship at least. I don't know, but it's like all mythology, it's kind of synthesized into a story format that ends up meaning that we can't quite tell what things are supposed to represent further down the line, and we've got to do work like this to try and see if we can make head or tail of it. Let's move on to the next slide, because there are a few other things that we can talk about. I don't know if you want to try and pronounce this one at the top.
Yeah, that's Tokmirke Toin.
Itoin, okay.
Yeah.
In English, the wooing of Itoin. This is a story that's mostly about the Dagda and then some other figures, but Brez is mentioned in it. He's, again, Tuatha Dé Danann. He's not Fomorian at all, so, again, completely contradicts the one that we've just been looking at, which contradicted the one we were looking at before. But there's no negative connotation with Brez at all. He's sort of, Dagda sends... I think a guy called Elkmar or something off to Brez's fort to do something, and he puts spells on him so that he has to do all this kind of stuff, and he'll never notice that the days are passing, and it means that Dagda can go and sleep with his wife. Great. Who I can't remember if this one is called Ethnu actually. There's another Ethnu somewhere along the way who is not Lu's mother. It's a different figure, and it's just so confusing when you're trying to get down to it. Yeah, but anyway, so in that one, there's nothing bad to be said about Brez at all. He just performs a role for the Dagda, essentially. I mean, he's pretty much just ignorant of, what the Dagda's intentions are. He's just trying to help out a mate, basically. And then you get this other text that's called Cath Moi Chura Conga. This is the story about the first Battle of Moitura, in which there is a figure called Brez, who is a Tuatha Dé Danann hero. He's sent to meet Sreng, who's the sort of foremost among the Firbolg, before the first Battle of Moitura. He's called one of 3 nobles of the Tuatha, along with Dagda and Nuada, who is the king. This Brez is killed in the first Battle of Moitura. He's there right up at the front, and he's killed. And he was married to Brigid as well. So, what? This is so strange.
Sorry, what? So in what is it in Cath Moitura that the Brez is married to Brigid as well, or?
Yes.
Right.
In both of them.
Okay.
So Brigid, basically, if you read them sequentially, Brigid is married to a Tuatha Dé Danann person called Brez, who is not the one who gets killed by Lu with the wooden kine. Definitely not. It's the one who gets killed in the first Battle of Moitura. Following which, Brigid is married to a half Fomorian figure called Brez, who isn't killed at the end of the second Battle of Moitura, but might be killed by Lu using the wooden kine trick.
Right.
Yeah. What's happening here? I don't understand. I mean, I've got some ideas. People have got some theories about how this has become quite so confused. I think we can skip the next slide because it's just that map again, showing off to the left side where the Battle of Southern Moitura, that's the first Battle of Moitura in County Mayo.
Yeah.
That's where that all went down. And we can go on to the next slide, which is just the last kind of little tracts of text that, where we've got some references to Brez, and bearing in mind this figure is not mentioned much at all, just slightly more than Brigid in the long run. So we've got these poems, the metrical Dinsenchus, which again is just place law, but metrical this time. Great. There's a story about I don't know if she's a demon or a goddess. It's hard to say, but she's called Carmen, and she sort of basically imperils the Tuatha Danan's subsistence, makes it difficult for them to grow food or something. I forget the details. Anyway, she's killed because she's a nuisance, and the esteemed elders take quite a while actually to decide who should have the honor of burying this creature, and eventually they say Brez should do it. So that kind of suggests that he's got quite a kind of prominent and specific, maybe even emblematic role in this particular story. Argiculture, if you want. Have a look at that. I love it.
So in this one, it doesn't say specifically whether he's Tuatha Dé or half Fomorian or anything. It's just kind of implied that he's Tuatha Dé, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, or at the very least that they accept him as one of their own. Maybe it's because he's Eriu's son. I mean, his mother, his parentage obviously changes here and there, because in some of the texts. So when Brez is Nate, when Brez is the grandson of Nate, his father seems to be Balor. And Elatha's not involved at all at that point. And Eriu, presumably, is not involved at all at that point. So that's just a sort of different, parallel tradition where we're skipping generations here, at least 2 generations, because in the other traditions, obviously, it's Balor who is Nate. He's the grandson of Nate. So it goes Nate, somebody else, then Balor, then Elatha, and then Brez. So it's pretty confusing all around.
Yeah.
But the worst bit of it is here in Lebor Gabal Aaron. The whole premise of Cath Moi Tura is that Brez is foreign-born because his father is Fomorian. The problem with this is that in Lebor Gabal Aaron, the Tuatha Dé Danann are called Clan Eladan, which means the descendants of Elatha. They are all descended from Elatha. Whether they're Fomorians or Tuatha Dé, that distinction is not made at all. So, and the real figurehead, who is the progenitor of Dagda, Ogma, eventually Delbaith, all of these other Tuatha Dé figures, and even of Brigid, weirdly, he's Brigid's grandfather, is Brez. So we've got multiple genealogical traditions that are completely conflicting with each other. It just depends on which text you read. And I'm sure that we could do a lot of work trying to find out where these different traditions come from and why different parts of Ireland remember these figures quite so differently. I might mention a little bit about that once we've gone through the presentation. If we go to the next slide, this is the dreaded genealogy, which I will not go into too much because we tried that already, you and I, and it's deeply, deeply confusing. But long story short, Brigid is her own aunt, I think, and possibly her own grandmother. She's also possibly her own mother, just point blank, because her mother is never, ever named. Dagda has the name Brig in one of his names, which kind of suggests that she might be a kind of mind-spawned, like Athena is kind of created by Zeus, so it could be something like that. But at any rate, Dagda is at least a half brother, if not a full brother, of Brez. Oh my God, this gets so bad. Right, one of Ruadan's descendants, as far as I can remember, is down here at the bottom left. We've got these figures: Mackecht, Maccool, and Macgrain. Right, Macgrain is the son of the sun. And the son of the sun, as in the son of the big ball in the sky, is Elatha. So you can actually draw a line from Macgrain back down to Dagda, Ogma, Brez, and so forth. So it's this horrible like circle of people begetting each other, and they're all like each other's aunts, cousins, brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, and it's horrific to try and work it out. If you see that Eriu, who is supposed to be Brez's mother by Elatha, is the granddaughter of Oma, who is Brez's brother. So it's proper fucked.
Yep.
Yeah, I think maybe the less said about that, the better. We'll leave that. I think people can pause the video here and try and work this out if they dare. I couldn't. But you and I might go on to the next slide. And,
okay.
This is where the discussion can kind of open out. Right. Why? Why are there so many discrepancies in these? This is just one figure. This is just one, deific figure in all of Irish law. And he's so confusing. There's most of what we've got paints him out as a bad guy, but that's just one text. And then if you take all the other texts, he's either totally neutral or actually really good. So you can't really take anybody's word for it. Now, I've put here a couple of thoughts that I've had and a couple of thoughts that other people have had.
Yeah.
I haven't half wondered if there aren't multiple Brezes. I think we were kind of touching on that a little bit, to do with the one who died in the first Battle of Moytura compared to the one who didn't die at the end of the second Battle of Moytura. It could be that there's multiple, like a Tuatha Brez and a Fomorian Brez. There are 3 Bridgets who are one. There are all of the Trinitarian Christians out there. You guys were way behind. The Irish had this stuff down centuries, if not millennia, before it was a Christian thing. The idea of that there are 3 but they are one, or whatever. So I don't know. Could it be that there's a Brez for each Bridget, and one of them dies, one of them survives, and the other one dies? One dies at the first Battle of Moytura, one survives the second Battle of Moytura, and the other's killed by the wooden cattle, the fake cow juice. I don't know.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, the one that's killed by the cow juice. So he's specified as being half Fomorian as well, as in
no, he is fully Tuatha Danann, and
he's killed.
He's killed by Lugh, who is half Fomorian. So some people have suggested that this Nechtan character that wants Brez dead is a Fomorian. Other people have said that it's Nuada, just being called Nechtan for some reason. And I guess there must be other theories as well, but I've only really clocked those 2.
Sorry, why was it that Lugh kills Brez in that story again?
Because Nechtan asked him to.
Right.
That's a poem. The Can't We Nate one is a poem. It like a lot of this kind of poetry, it assumes familiarity with the context. So a lot of these things are sort of referred to and then not really explained.
So he doesn't. It doesn't say why Nechtan asks Lugh to kill Brez. It's just that's what happens. Okay, I see. I see.
If you want, I could actually find it. I've got a translation of that text here, and I could try and find the references. Right, that's that. Yeah, it's sort of not really. In the reign of Nechtan Taxhand, with famous love, with long-running secrets, upon the king of the 2 Mumans, that's East and West Munster apparently, came the foundation of the living nature. This is really hard to understand. The cattle of every estate, a lasting harm was done by him, Nechtan. They were burned upon tribute until they were coloured black. A paste of ashes would be smeared by the ubiquitous cunning ones upon the cattle, famous for porridge. As far as their clever finds, they sculpted steadfast wooden cows. That united host of slippery freemen. Lugh, he was affectionate at all those times. He chose them and he assembled them. That is the wooden kine. Canvas wineskins in their crotches were put with fluent ever quickness, pure effective rue without substance. That was the milk that filled it, so just some kind of garbage, sewage it could be. And in other versions of the story, it's like piss, basically.
Lovely.
300, that was their amount of value until that hosting through his false mist, which they're saying is maybe sort of deceit. To this strife, there was not brought one living cow of these cattle. Brez came vehement in valor to assess them to the middle of the pasture. From this, without a seed of sustenance, he was killed and died. So he drank it all. Vehement in valor, meaning he wasn't going to back down. He was going to accord to his gaius and everything. So that's how it's presented in the, and that's a pretty direct translation. So it seems that Lug is just sort of along for the ride. He's, co-opted by this Nechtan Baschain tax hand to give this stuff to Brest. Maybe the story would be that Brest wouldn't trust Nechtan, but he would trust Lug or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. I think he probably would have clocked that they were wooden cows and that the milk smelt rather foul. So I don't think it says in the mist, whatever that was about, the false mist, which they say might be artificial deceit. It's pretty confusing.
Yeah.
It was taboo for Brest to refuse any trick given to him. He drank it without any cowardice. I do not know what it might bring. In illustrious Carnwy Nate, the sorrowful sign was killed. So he was killed there and he's buried there because he drank without fear a drink of the overdark rue, which they've also translated as red dye. From this demand without justice, after his taboos were exhausted, without lawfulness, without decorousness of esteem, over him is the grave of Brest. Yeah. Interesting stuff. So it's a very, very different from that. It's pretty obtuse, that poem. In Kath Moitura, it's really, really clear because it's prose. It's just like, this is what happened. So, I mean, it could be that there's multiple Bresses and one of them died in southern Moitura on the far west side of Connacht or whatever that is.
Yep.
One of them might have died down in Carnwy Nate, and one of them might have survived the second Battle of Moitura. Maybe. I've also put here genealogical confusion because there's a lot of figures with the same name. We've both clocked this looking at Irish. This is why we don't want to go back to Ireland half the time, because trying to remember who's who is just impossible. I was looking at a brief bit about the first Battle of Moitura, and there's a reference to a figure who dies among the Fir Bog. It's actually the king of the Fir Bog, and his name is Yochide. Does that remind you of anybody else's name?
Yochid, no.
Yochu or Yochide?
It's
I can tell you that.
Yochid.
Go. Yeah. One of Bressa's names is Yochad.
Right.
And the Dagda is called Yochad Olaher, or however that's pronounced.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So we've now got 3 kings called Yochad.
Yeah. Yep.
And the only way you can tell them apart is their other epithets, and the fact that one of them is Fir Bog, one of them is definitely Tuatha Danann, and the other one may or may not be Tuatha or Fomorian. But it's that level of confusion that we get in quite a lot of places in Irish law, I've found, where similarities in names or people just plumb having the same name, it seems that when a lot of these stories were being repeated during the oral times or even when they were being written down, people forgot how to tell one from the other. And so you get these things where people are supposedly alive for centuries, basically, as far as their own chronology is concerned, and they're involved in events that are happening at this point. That's like Bronze Age or Iron Age, and then they're involved in stuff that's happening in the Roman period. Basically, yeah. I'm going to use this word confusing all the way through this because it just is. Yeah,
I mean, at the very least, it does seem as if the Irish they've definitely I don't know if I get the sense that they've tried their best to remember just as much as they possibly could, and this is just the result. Is like, yeah, it's just that they've tried to remember like all of the specific details from, you know, as far back as they can. They want to get, you know, the full story of their island and the people on it, and that's, yeah, this is just what you get as a result.
But part
it's
of the
like,
problem with that,
eh?
it seems like different parts of Ireland remember these stories differently. So
Yeah.
they're collecting one set of stories from Leinster, let's say, and then they get a set of stories from Munster that have got either the same characters in different roles and different contexts, or different characters that just have the same names. And at some point, it's all kind of getting, you know, it's just merging into itself, and
Yeah.
it becomes difficult to tease apart the different strains that have ended up, you know, becoming one. Which again, that's I suppose that's a sort of parallel process to a genealogical confusion. That's a straight up mythological confusion. That's just a confusion of law.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I will say, I said Leinster in particular because Bridget is strongly associated in terms of like place names and stuff like that with Leinster.
Yeah.
So if Brez had a home county and he was, you know, associated with Bridget, his homeland would be Leinster. These stories, the Cathmoitura stuff, I mean, it's placing everything happening up in Connaught, so you might think that those are northwestern Irish stories that are involving southeastern Irish figures for some reason.
Yeah. But that's a bit like how you've got all these Welsh stories talking about stuff that happened in the southeast of England, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about that, I guess, in the next slide. I'll just get through one really compelling theory about what's happened with this Cathmoitura text is about when it was written down. People have quite reliably placed it around the 9th to early 10th centuries AD, which, as you know, is the height of the Viking period. You've got a lot of things happening in Ireland because of Norsemen who are coming from the north, and they are definitely mating with the local ladies, and some of those Gael, as they're called, some of them would be great, and some of them presumably would be really bad. Some of them might really favor their maternal Irish heritage, whereas others might favor their paternal Norse heritage. You've got all the issues with like Dublin being set up and the wars between the Norse kings of Dublin and all of the Irish people around them, and just general kind of attacks and undermining of Irish culture, which of course by then was Christian. The Irish were very Christian by that point. I'm sure that there was still sort of pagan enclaves and pagan beliefs going about here and there, but nominally, officially, they were all supposed to be Christian, and yet most of the Norse were not. So it seems like it's possible that this particular text, that's so detailed and it's the most kind of, you know, as I said, composite story that we've got about this kind of stuff, that it is so detailed and so composite because it was written, you know, at this later point, and it's not so much a piece of mythology as it is a piece of contemporary political and social commentary. And it's talking about the dangers of, you know, to Irish culture and to Irish lineages and all of that, of all of these Norsemen coming in. And so they've grabbed these, they are memes, they're mythemes, but they are memes. Fomorians, all the pagan stories say that they're monstrous evil people. Tuatha Dé Danann, well, they're the native Irish gods. Right, pit them against each other. That's probably an old school story. But then, you know, we need somebody who can represent like a Gael kind of person. I know. We'll take Brez and Elatha, we'll shift them over to the Fomorians, and we'll have them fight a war with Lugh, and we'll make him the other way round. That he's actually from a native father and a foreign mother, because that's also, I think, the only reference to that might be in Cathmoitura. I might be wrong about that. That might be discussed in another text, but. As far as I'm aware, Lugh is only half Fomorian in Cathmoitura. Same as Bress is only half Fomorian in Cathmoitura.
So he's that poem, the one where Bress takes the cow.
Yeah.
So Lu is not described as half Fomorian in that
No.
poem. It's just
No,
he's just Lu.
no, the
I see.
Fomorians aren't mentioned at all. Bress is specifically called the flower or the chosen of the Tuatha.
Yeah.
Nechten, nothing is said about that figure, and Lug, nothing is said about that figure either. I would assume from the context that since Nechten is sort of like a king over Brez and presumably over Lug, I would assume that these are all Tuatha figures, but I could be wrong about that. Like I said, I don't know the law that poem's referring to. Unfortunately, nobody does. We don't seem to have it anymore.
Yeah.
So
the Book of Invasions, Leber Gavala Aaron. So it doesn't specify either about Lu and Bress in terms of their being half Fomorian.
I don't think it does. I think in Leber Gavala Aaron, I think the only Bress that's mentioned is the one, apart from the one who's like the progenitor of the Tuatha Danann, who you would assume then is firmly Tuatha Danann. I think if another Bress is mentioned, it's going to be the one that went to meet Sreng of the Fir Bolg and ended up dying in the first Battle of Moytura.
Right.
I might be wrong about that. Again, it's been a very long time since I've read that text as well.
So they don't. I'm just thinking about the story where Lu is he's conceived by Balor's daughter, and Balor locks her in like his castle, and then this is like I suppose that would be the explanation as to why Balor was willing to help Bress fight against the Tuatha. Is that story about Lu's coming about? What can you remember which text that's in? Is that in the Cath Moytura?
I'm pretty sure that's Cath Moytura. I didn't go into it because it's not specifically to do with Bress. I'm really trying to focus on this because Lu is a much less ambiguous character in many ways, because apart from Khan Queen 8, actually, he's almost always positively depicted, which you'd expect for a kind of a god, right?
Yeah, the sort of like chief. Well, is it chief? Well, he seems to have been like he appears all over the Celtic world. Put it that way. Like he was.
Yeah.
He was a pan-Celtic god. So
Yeah.
Okay, so it's only Cath Moytura that has this theme of like the Lu and Bress being half Fomorian, and in all the other texts they're you may assume they're probably Tuatha.
Yeah, I think I might be wrong about that, and if anybody knows that I'm wrong about that, please leave a comment, let us know, because there's only so many hours in the day, and there's only so much Irish lore that I can read before I need to scrub my eyes out and remember that I'm supposedly English. Probably more Irish than English, to be honest. But, yeah. Shall we go on to the last slide then, to wrap this up? Because I wanted to bring this out into a kind of general discussion of the process of mythological development over time. So I've listed these kinds of things: biblicisms in recorded pre-Christian lore, like in the Celtic corpus or in Germanic mythology. There's room to kind of interpret. I mean, there's definitely stuff in Leber Gavala Aaron, but the whole chronology of Irish mythology is expressed in terms of biblical chronology, which makes sense because by the point at which they were writing it down, everybody was taught from day dot that Genesis was the truth. So you have to measure time from when God created the world, which was however many thousands of years before these people lived. So as far as they were concerned, they absolutely knew how time looked, and they were able to place their sort of pre-Christian history within that time frame. So they're always referencing, and this was the time when Moses led his people out of Egypt, and this was the time when the Jews crossed the Red Sea, and this happened at the time when some other biblical thing happened. You see this a lot in the Irish texts and in some other cultures' mythology as well. You get things like, I've written here, paganisms in, for example, Arthurian romances, where the Arthurian romances are generally expressed in a Christian context, and everybody's Christian, and they talk about God, or as a singular, and Christ and all that kind of stuff, similar to like Beowulf. There's some Christianisms in Beowulf
Yeah.
alongside paganisms. There, it's clear that some of these elements, some of them, for like the Arthurian romances, it's almost like if the people who were writing these stories down even understood what these motifs were really trying to point to, that would have been occult knowledge of a pre-Christian past that would have been carefully guarded. Kind of, you wouldn't necessarily want the priest to know that you knew this stuff. You could sing it, and people could say, "Oh, but it's just the story. It's just how the story goes. Don't worry about it."
Yeah.
But if you understood it, then that's sort of magic, witchcraft, maybe, I don't know, but yeah, voodoo basically. So then going forward in time, you've got like Shakespeare rewrites stories, right? He's got source material. So Hamlet, for example, based on the story of Amleth, the Danish prince, his version is reasonably faithful to the oldest versions that we've got of that story, but it's different. It brings in different elements. Some of the relationships between the characters are different, and some of the socio-political commentary is obviously, it's intended for Shakespeare's audience, a contemporary English audience. He's not writing a story for 11th, 12th century Danes, whenever Amleth, or 10th century, whenever Amleth, the actual figure, supposedly lived. Same with his histories. They are partially entertainment, partially social commentary, partially propaganda, and things like King Lear and all of that. So you were saying about the Welsh having stories set in Kent or whatever, or in London or whatever. Shakespeare's taking this lore that, I mean, really, isn't that all based on Monmouth, King Lear, and all of that?
I'm not completely sure, but I would not be. I don't know actually the story of King Lear.
I think it's based in Geoffrey of Monmouth, who's
Right.
was questioned even in the sort of 14th, 15th century. So within 200 or 300 years of him having penned all of this stuff. But as far as I've learned now, actually both
I think
sort of,
I think even at the time there was, in the 12th century, there was I think an English historian, and he was like, "Nah, this guy's full of it."
It's not Malmesbury, is it?
I think it may well be, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Because people picked up on Malmesbury. Monmouth was sort of like generally accepted in sort of like courts, and like, so the kinds of playwrights like Shakespeare, not Shakespeare himself necessarily, but who would put things on in courts. Monmouth's stories seem to have been sort of accepted until a certain point when everybody's pointing back to Malmesbury and looking at it more closely. And apparently, I've learnt this more recently, apparently the Welsh as well were like, yeah, this is complete bollocks.
Right. Yeah.
And like nobody bothered to record that for fucking ages. And then eventually it's like, yeah, well, we've never agreed with this guy's stuff, but whatever. Some people still today absolutely think that Monmouth is bona fide history, even though some of it is categorically insane and impossible.
Yeah.
Same as some of the monk stuff,
Is there not like a lot of the Welsh mythology, like the texts are actually later than him? So even though they the stories are earlier, the texts themselves were written after he lived.
If you're talking about like the Red Book of Hagest and the White Book of Carmarthen, I think you're right. I think those are more 14th, 15th, 16th century books. But they're clearly, I mean, the traditions that they refer to, as you're saying, are definitely older than Monmouth, and they make more sense.
Yeah, there's so much in Monmouth that is just not in those at all. So that's.
I mean, he's clearly riffing mostly on Roman histories.
Yeah, and Greco-Roman generally, that kind of. But there's so much that is just there that it's just like. Yeah, I think you've mentioned before actually to me about Monmouth and just how, what was it? You said something about he's one of the most frustrating kind of, because you just wonder, like, did he just pull a lot of the details out of thin air, or like maybe we must have got it from somewhere. Who knows?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is him just trying to kind of introduce elements from Greco-Roman histories and mythologies into a sort of British context, but without any real. I mean, he's got little kind of a little bit of anchoring here and there with a historically attested figure, like the stuff that when the Romans are writing about Britain, Monmouth is pretty good at treating that kind of stuff. When the Romans aren't writing about Britain, even though they're involved in Britain and it's been annexed essentially, but they haven't left much of a record. He just seems to go off on one and make up this stuff that's sort of like basically says. I mean, his argument is, oh well, of course the Roman Empire became British over time, which is kind of a bit of a classic at this point, isn't it? That's the equivalent of everybody's Turkic. They just don't know it. Everybody's a Slav. We're all Albanian. And nowadays, it's obviously we're all African, and the only real people that have ever existed are black Africans.
Yeah.
Same kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I would happily say that what Monmouth was engaging in is some of the earlier forms of, here underneath Shakespeare, Gothic and early fantasy literature. You think about the degree to which, coming out of the 18th century, a lot of the Romantic movement, they were drawing heavily on Greco-Roman, but also pre-Christian in principle motifs and themes, and these were the kinds of stories that they liked to rehabilitate for modern audiences. They liked to bring this kind of, because it's a lot more like spooky kind of ghosts and visitations from other worlds and stuff, which really fitted the Gothic aesthetic, and then or the Romantic literature that was sort of naturalistic and anti-industry and all that kind of stuff. People have had a tendency to kind of dip back into old lore and reshape it for contemporary purposes, which we see with our modern adaptations. I've put down there Rings of Power, Disney Wars, with this terrible stuff that we're getting nowadays. But you can see you're taking beloved franchises and butchering them because it's politically expedient, something like that. So that's maybe what was happening with this Kathmoy Chira text, was that we have some established stories. Back in the 9th, 10th century, everybody's Christian, more or less, nominally at least, in Ireland. But there's still sort of storytellers going about telling the ancient lore, especially Dinsenchas, the lore of places, which necessarily involves stories of the ancient gods and ancient heroes and stuff like that. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that people in general would have been familiar with the ideas of Fomorians, Tuatha Dé Danann, Brez, Brigid, Nuada, Lu, Dagda. All of these figures would have been household names. They would have been the equivalent of, Santa Claus, He-Man, Gandalf. It's the same kind of thing, and it's really not difficult to write a fan fiction in which Gandalf is a cross-dresser, for example. It's not difficult, and you can do that to push a particular point if you feel like it's probably going to backfire, because most people will be like, why are you applying this unnecessary thing to this character that's kind of weird? But in other contexts, I mean, some of, like, for example, the Nazi fascination with Germanic paganism, even though they always fucked around on the borders, never really going in fully for it, and toying with Christianity a lot, but they still kind of reimagine the ancient Germanic gods in a pro-Nazi kind of way, right? That's sort of drawing on that field of influence to try and it's I guess it's sort of magical work, isn't it? Because these are like collective unconscious things at this point. If you think Jungian archetypes and all that kind of stuff. If you can wield them effectively, then you can change people's minds about stuff, because they identify with the image, with the idea, the ideal, and then you put that in a particular context, and people in 9th, 10th century Ireland are saying, God, I hate that Brez figure, bloody foreigner, like all these bloody Norsemen coming over nowadays, taking our jobs and our women and ruining our culture, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that is that as far as my presentation is concerned. I'm happy to go on discussing some of these things if you want.
Is there another slide, or is that it?
No, that's the last one. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, I suppose my question is, like, why did they pick Bress in particular? Like,
It's a good question. It's a good question. There is some theory about what the name means. Um, Basically, Bress in Old Irish means a shout or an uproar or a calamity, a cacophony maybe, or it's like a big kind of loud kind of thing. Alternatively, it can mean overly proud or boastful. So this kind of plays into maybe a theory of two Bresses, that one of them is the kind of battle cry, and that's the one that dies in the first Battle of Moytura, and then the other one is more boastful and overly proud and that kind of thing, and he's the greedy, inept king, maybe. That at least is one kind of theory that I read about the name that I think might play into that. That because obviously, you know, they spoke Irish, they knew what they were saying, and so it could be in the same way that everybody nowadays more or less knows who Alexander the Great is.
Yeah.
Right, and it's specifically Alexander the Great that we're talking about, that one, not Alexander Komnenos. And most people nowadays are like, Alexander who?
Yeah.
Nobody knows who Komnenos is, even though he was definitely Jesus according to Flamenco. So it could be something like that, where you know, the guy who's running it is like, well, it's not that Bress. We all love that Bress. That's the Leinster Bress. This is the Connaught Bress, and he's an asshole, and we don't like him. And people go, oh yeah, never heard of him before. Yeah, sure, fair enough. Okay, it could be. I don't know. It's going to be pure speculation on that kind of stuff.
Right.
I mean, I could go and talk a little bit about Brigid, because I mean, there's some rather. It's strange in a way that these figures are so poorly attested, because as far as I think we can tell from archaeology and folklore, not you know, mythological texts, Brigid was really important, like really important, and for the whole of Ireland, but specifically for Leinster. So, I mean, she's associated with, like I said towards the beginning, sovereignty in general. She is one of these tripartite sovereignty goddesses that just represents Ireland, like Brez's mother, Eriu, literally, Air. She is a representation of Ireland, which again is kind of weird, that the son of the representation of Ireland marries the representation of Ireland, whatever. But she's also got the healing, smithing, and poetry associations. One thing that is particularly interesting between Brigid, Elatha, and Danu, I'm pretty sure that Elatha, if you get the right etymology for it, basically means art or craft, and Danu also means art or craft. So there's some sense in all of this lore of the divine figures, the kind of like the forming powers of the world, being born of some primordial ability, artistry, I mean, magic, whatever it could be.
Right.
To that point, if you start reading it like that it's not about people, it's not about human beings as much as it's about, say, cosmic forces or stuff like that, then it makes a little bit more sense how Brez can be his own grandfather and his own half-brother, and he's married to his aunt who's his niece, and it's fucking confusing.
Yeah. I mean, we've tried considering the especially the Lebergavala Erin as possibly somehow relating the ancient migrations to Ireland. Well, that seems to be what it's that seems to be what it's about, and
that's what it says it's about, 100%. And but we can't really find very accurate parallels between Lebergavala Erin and what we know from genetic analysis.
Yeah,
you can, that's your point, but every time you try and fix it, something else slips out, and it's like
yeah.
There's
problems there. I did actually have a couple of questions about that, so I've gone back to that slide where you've got that there, just because I wanted to I suppose clarify. So you say, he said that the Fomorians were also descended from Elatha. Is that or
There's just no distinction made, as far as I can tell, in Le Borgabella Aaron. I mean, this is. It might be that we're actually that my sources on this are mistaken, and that we've got missing texts that distinguish between the Elatha, who is the progenitor of Clan Eladan, which includes a Bress and Bress's descendants, including Dagda, Ogma, etc. And then there's another Elatha who is a son of Balor, and that he's a Fomorian, and that he's different. I don't know. Maybe that was a thing. But as far as the law that we've got is concerned, there's this figure called Elatha, who's the grandsire of the Tuatha Dé Danann, and this figure called Elatha, who is a Fomorian, who's the father of Bress. And there's no difference in their epithets or anything like that. They're just Elatha.
I mean, as far as Cath Moitura is concerned, if they're dating the text to the 9th and 10th centuries, and they suspect that there's some sort of contemporary political commentary going on, would that not just imply that if the people that wrote them down were Christian, that they might just have been like picking particular figures from like these stories and setting them up in a particular way? Because if let's say we have a lot of these poems, and these poems might be descended from like older pagan poems and things like that, then and they're depicting Bress positively, and Elatha is the progenitor of the Tuatha Dé Danann and so on. But this more kind of this text that seems to be using these they would have been well-known mythological figures at the time, but to like, you know, people that had been Christian for a good while at that point, like a few centuries. Like the paganism, there wouldn't have been it's hard to say if there would have been any Irish at that point that would have actually, you know, considered themselves pagan. Maybe like some very remote parts of you know, the island, or some of the wee islands off the west coast or whatever. But I don't know. I'm thinking it's possible that they might just have the idea of the Fomorians that we can get from the Levor Gavala Erin. Again, problems because it's been written down by monks, but the fact that it does seem to draw on pre-Christian lore, and the fact that the Fomorians are just like the antagonistic force. I don't know if there's a possibility that like they've just somebody whoever wrote Cath Moitura has just sort of decided to include like these particular figures for whatever reason as being like Fomorians, even though they were Tuatha Dé or whatever. It's that's quite confusing. I mean, like, just the bits where it says Bress is named as the progenitor of all of the Tuatha Dé. So that's in Lebor Gabala Erin. So like the Tuatha Dé are descended from a guy called Bress.
Yeah. Which, and again, somebody's even said, so much like what you're saying about, basically, could they have just like picked these names out of a hat? I mean, all right, this guy's a baddie, this is a good guy, this is a baddie, this is a good. We don't need two baddies, the rest of them are all good. Maybe, but somebody's even said that for Lebor Gabala Aaron, when they were putting it together, like they were authentically trying to create a consolidated understanding of Irish history. But they might have just sort of like kind of like that, like pick names at random because they're in the traditions and in the genealogies. And then in the process of trying to make something, you know, to consolidate it all, they've actually just confused it. It's not impossible. So this is why I'm, you know, formerly I would have said, defer to Lebor Gabala Aaron. I don't know why. I think it might be because it's a major text and it's one that I was introduced to earlier. So it's always just had like a high position in my hierarchy of texts, I suppose. But
Yeah.
nowadays, I'd probably more likely look at the Dinsenthus and what they have to say, because those are more rustic, I guess,
Yeah.
local traditions, instead of people trying to make a big grand tradition for the whole. It's always this thing of like, yeah, King Arthur, he ran the whole of Britain, you know, from John O'Groats down to Penzance across to Canterbury and further. The whole of Britain, he ran all of it, 100%. Why? Because it's in the law, and we all desperately want to have this sense of having been a consolidated people under a single crown with a single pantheon, and everybody understood everything the same way. We had one language, blah, 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 blah. Looking at the archaeology, no, not a chance.
Yeah.
Not a chance. The distances are too big.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, I mean, just thinking about that, like the Beaker folk that that the Britons, the Welsh, are descended from, they spread across the whole island, so they were all descended from the same people. It's just
sure. Although there is a massive difference between the Eastern Beaker tradition that comes out of like the Netherlands, going up into Scotland, and the more southern Western Beaker tradition that comes from northern France, isn't it?
Sure, but
it's not that big of a difference. I know you go back a few generations; those two populations come from the same place, but still, you know, I don't think that we have any room to say that Beaker people were socially and politically homogenous.
No, that I suppose that wasn't what I was saying. It was more just the fact that like they came from the same stock of people. You know, like there's a branch of corded ware. And that like that I don't know, the L21 people,
I think that's all fine, but this is the interesting thing when you're looking at like Irish genetics and how heavily L21 it is. And well, where did that L21 come from? Britain, basically. And then you look at Irish law and where people are supposed to have come from, and most of them haven't come from Britain as far as the Irish were concerned. Some of them did. Some of the Firbolg came from Britain. Some of the Fomorians might have come from Scotland, but the Tuatha Dé Danann didn't. The Medians didn't. The Gaels didn't.
The Tuatha Dé might have come from the just because it talks about the north of the world, and if they're coming to Ireland, to me that would suggest they would have had to have come through like Scotland. Basically.
That was written at a time when the north of the world included Iceland and Scandinavia.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So that's always what I thought was interesting. Right. Like at the time at which Lebor Gabála Érenn was written down, I mean, the Irish, the educated Irish, definitely knew about lands further north than Scotland. 100%.
That was another thing I wanted to point out is that may be an issue for us, is that Lebor Gabála Érenn is dated to later than Cath Maith Tuaire.
Okay. Yeah. So this plays into general kind of confusion about who's who and when, and like you were saying, people picking different figures to kind of play different roles at different times and things.
I mean, to be fair, it does. So if Cath Maith Tuaire is dated to the 9th, 10th centuries, presumably the people that wrote down the Lebor Gabála Érenn would have been aware of that text, maybe, like probably.
Presumably, I mean, probably, maybe, but at the same time, they don't seem to refer to it at all.
Yeah.
Let me just have a quick look and see what people say about Cath Maith Tuaire, because I'm doing everything that I'm saying is based on what I've been reading about these texts from other scholars. Yeah. Not actually, you know, I haven't looked at the texts themselves for quite a while. Unfortunately, nobody's.
I suppose the detail about the Tuatha Dé being descendants of Elatha, I mean, that, like, again, it's a question of, like, is it just different people with the same name, or what, or is it the same person? And it's like we just can't know.
We can't find out, unfortunately. No. We're left with this kind of, you know, frayed lore that doesn't. When you've got a tapestry that's been burnt, well, you can sort of tell that this bit would have been on the left and that bit would have been on the right, but you have no idea what happened in the middle.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think the only thing that I can really think of that is a clue to something. I'm just gonna go back to this bit about Carnhui Nate. And would Balor being killed by the horrible juice,
the cow juice? Yeah.
You mentioned where's that again? Where does it say that?
I don't know if it does on this presentation that I've done. That's just something that I learned when I was putting it together.
Do you remember which source?
Oh, I actually tried to find it, and I couldn't. All I could find was academics referencing a tradition where Balor is the one that's killed by Lu using the fake cows. And I kept searching for it, and I couldn't find anything about Balor dying like this, but I kept finding people saying that there is stuff that says that. They just wouldn't say what it was. Right. So I threw that in because he is referred to as Nate. That is 100% true.
Balor.
Yeah, I forget where. It's in one of these kind of more genealogical tracts where they're saying son of so-and-so who was son of so-and-so who was son of so-and-so. And you get Balor, son of someone, son of Nate. And I think there's at least one part where he's called Nate it might even be in Cath Moitura, actually.
So hang on, let me get this straight, the thing with Carnhui Nate. So it's called Carnhui Nate. The person supposed to be buried there is Balor.
Well, this is the problem. As far as the poem is concerned, the person who's meant to be buried there is Bress. As far as other bits of folklore are concerned, the person who's buried there is Balor.
Okay, that means then that there's some sort of confusion between Balor and Bress. That's
I mean, the suggestion in the poem Carnhui Nate is that no, hang on, it's just super confused.
Okay,
basically.
Yeah.
Because in the Carnhui Nate poem, obviously, there's no reference to Fomorians at all.
Yeah.
Whereas if Balor is the one buried in a promontory off of southwest Ireland, that's a bit confusing, isn't it? This northern-derived Fomorian guy that used to live on Tory Island didn't get buried on Tory Island. He got buried about as far from Tory Island as you can go and still say that you're in Ireland.
Yeah, actually, yep.
That's pretty weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if actually Carnhui Nate, the place, isn't the burial place of another grandson of Nate, who we've forgotten. And since we've got these traditions of, on the one hand, Balor being the grandson of Nate, I think that's the Cath Moitura tradition. On the other hand, it seems that Bress in this Dinsenchus poem is the Hui Nate. That seems to be where this confusion has come in. I think that Nate is such an ancient and kind of unknown figure that we don't know how many children he had.
Yeah.
But there could have been multiple Carnhui Nates all around Ireland, one for each of his grandsons, for all we know. One of them might have been called Bress, and one of them might have been called Balor, but it might not be this Bress or this Balor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
there is, I think, some scholarship that's done on Nate. Yeah, the Irish god of war.
Okay.
Husband of Nemain and Orfea, sometimes of Bad. Also here in Wikipedia it says grandfather of Balor. Actually, it says that Nate was killed in the Second Battle of Moitura. Okay, I didn't know that. That's going to be in the Cath Moitura text. He's described as the uncle of the Dagda.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this is really, oh God, this is so confusing. Dagda gave Nate a place called Eilich Nate, or Nate's Stonehouse, which is elsewhere described as the grave of Aid, son of Dagda. Eilich Imchel, described as the bright home of horses, and an envied stronghold is another place where Aid is said to be buried, and which is said to be in the precinct where dwelt Nemain and Nate. Nate is described as dangerous and son of Endwi, king of the North Country, lord of horse-breeding peoples. His sons include Delbaith, the father of Ilatha. This is the thing about there being like 3 Delbaiths as well, who are all descended from each other. And if you go back to that genealogy image, you can see there's one Delbaith. There's another Delbaith, son of Ogma, and I think there's another Delbaith somewhere. Oh, there's a Delbaith who's the father of Ilatha, of course.
Son of Nate,
Yeah, son of Nate, which is strange because Ilatha, of course, is supposed to be the grandson of Balor. So is Nate the same as Balor? And if that's the case, then it's just so confusing. I've said that word about 15 times already.
Okay, at the very least, we've got something here in the sense that for some reason, there seems to be a confusion between the genealogies of the Fomorians and the Tuatha. So, despite
well, I've got something I can say about that. What, in a kind of anthropological sense, in an ethnic sense, what is Frigga in the Norse mythology?
She's an Oss.
Sure, but who are her parents?
Oh yeah. Well, her father is Fjörgen. And her mother is never named.
Yeah, although I think some people suggest, hang on, isn't there a Fjörgen with 2 N's as well?
Yep, and that's another name for Jorth, or Earth, who's Thor's
which is
mother.
Frigga, right? So
no,
Frigga is also called Jörð.
No, Jorth is a different goddess from Frigg. They're not the same.
Frigga is definitely called Jörð in several poems.
Really?
I'm pretty sure. I'm going to have to double check that, but I've been running with that understanding for years now.
Okay.
So again, Frigga, I've said this to you before. Morrigan, Morrig, Brigid, Brig, Frigg. There's a kind of mutation going along there. So, and long story short, there's something to do with the goddess that's her own mother, that's associated with the land, the earth, sovereignty, all that kind of stuff, who often tends to be married to a head god kind of figure. So it could be some part of this. So Fjörgen with 2 N's. Sorry, Fjörgen with 2 N's is the masculine form that's the father of Frigg.
Okay.
And with 1 N, it's the mother of Thor. But long story short, I seem to remember there being quite a lot of discussion about these actually being Jötnar, because they're not traditionally included in the sort of genealogies of Aesir. That's what I remember.
They're called Aesir in the Prozed,
at
least. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They're not.
But the Prozed. Did we believe Snorri?
If you believe Snorri, then they're Aesir. So.
Right. There's anyway. There's other figures I can't remember off the top of my head who are Aesir, but they are at least part. Well, I mean, Odin himself is partially descended from Jötnar.
Yeah.
So it's fine to say that there's a sort of essential distinction between Jötnar and Aesir and Vanir, let's say, and that there's an essential distinction between Fomorians, Tuatha Danann, and Firbolg, let's say. Yeah. But if I remember rightly, the Firbolg are said to be descendants of Nemed. The Tuatha Danann are said to be descendants of Nemed.
Yeah, and
the Fomorians as well.
They're not.
Well, actually, no. The Fomorians are not said to be descendants of Nemed. But if they're from Ilatha, let's say, then they'd be obviously of the same pedigree. So
yeah, it's I mean, I'm looking at the genealogy here. Ilatha, Delbaith, Nate. Right. Is Balor there?
No.
No, he's not on that list. Right, so it's specifically Lebor, Gavala, Erin, where they just don't. The Fomorians are not mentioned as any of the people that come to Ireland in this. Like, it talks about, like, oh yeah, this wave of people came and this wave of people came and so on. And it's like they're always, I suppose, pestered by the Fomorians who are based in Tory Island, or as you said. I'm just curious as to why you mentioned that the Fomorians might have been in Scotland as opposed to Tory
Because you
Island.
can't get that many people to stage a massive war effort against the Irish from Tory Island.
Okay, I see. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, very.
I'd say like the Isles, west of Scotland, Dumfries and Galloway, that and everything. Basically, West Scotland seems more likely, at least to be where they derive the bulk of their military strength, even if their sort of cultural and political strongholds is Tory Island.
Okay, well, at the very least, so the fact that the Tuatha Dé are described as coming from the north of the world, and I think it maybe does say that they just came over the sea or whatever, but it's like the it almost seems to me like there's some sort of the Tuatha Dé and the Fomorians, they both seem to have some sort of association with Scotland.
Yeah.
And they also seem to be kind of confused in their genealogies. So even though Levor Gavala Erin it doesn't really give a genealogy for the Fomorians, but it says the Tuatha Dé are descended from Nimed. A lot of the other sources we have, there's a strange kind of ambiguity between the two. And there's a lot of overlap, and this indications like, oh, they seem associated with the same area, like the area to the north of Ireland, basically, or just like sort of off the coast of it.
Yeah, it's so strange because I've just remembered looking it up. Obviously, the Fomorians do fight the Nemedians.
Yeah.
So I mean, let's bring this. Okay, we've been dealing with this largely mythologically. Shall we briefly talk about it with some, really circumspect assumptions as to what populations these sort of semi-divine groups might actually refer to?
Mm-hmm.
Could it be that Fomorians is basically like Picts, that for all of their eventually being largely Belbeaker derived on the paternal side of things, still seem to kind of maybe culturally they are more oriented to the early European farmer side of things than some of the other Belbeaker groups? Could it be something like that, where okay, well they've got shared lineages, but in terms of their cultural practice, they're radically different and they are antagonistic for various reasons, or even that. Let's say Belbeakers going into Ireland inherit some of the attitudes towards British populations that might already have been there in Ireland, but for sake of argument.
I think that's that last one in particular that you've mentioned. I don't know why, but I think that actually sounds pretty reasonable.
Okay.
There's this interesting.
That's a way of squaring it up, isn't it? Because then that means we can have our shared lineages, our shared genealogies, but we've got a secure basis to explain why these populations would be inimical to each other, even though they're related.
Yeah, I mean, there's this interesting thing that happens when the Beaker folk moved westward across Scotland. They started picking up more of the local burial traditions, and then they moved from there into Ireland, and they just kind of continued that thing, and they started to build what are called wedge tombs, which seem to have already been in Ireland, but most of them are actually like they were built during the Bronze Age, Beaker period kind of thing.
Okay.
So the Beaker folk, specifically in the west of Ireland, were building new wedge tombs, and they built most of them, even though it's a Neolithic style. And they're not Neolithic people, but they're obviously interacting.
That's radically different from. If you think about like Stonehenge and all of the round barrows that Beaker folk and later Bronze Age populations built, that's a conscious break from Neolithic tradition
Yeah.
even while they were still making use of sort of Neolithic ritual landscape and some of the structures that had been built 1,000 years before, but they were doing more of their kind of single grave culture stuff
Yeah.
instead of adopting Neolithic burial practices.
Well, that's they've brought their own burials, but the with the Stonehenge, they've kind of, the Stonehenge that everybody knows and loves is like that. That's like Beaker folk built, isn't it? Like they're the ones that built that, but it's originally a Neolithic monument. So
Did they actually? Did they rearrange it then?
I think so. Yeah, I think
I
like
thought that Stonehenge was like late third, or was third millennium BC.
well, that's the Beaker period. Late third millennium BC is the Beaker folk.
So I've got here the circle of large sarsen stones being placed between 2600 BC and 2400 BC.
Yeah, that's the
Is that roughly when the beakers are coming? I thought that they were coming from about 2500 BC on, but I wouldn't have expected them to be, in control in that sense at that point.
good point. I mean, that makes it sound as if they're just coming in then.
Yeah.
As that's so
this is the thing.
enough.
I mean, because okay, so the blue stones were given their current positions between 2400 and 2200 BC. That I can readily accept there would be Bell Beaker people involved with that, because they would have spread all through southern England at that point. But it seems like, I mean, some of they're saying here that the earliest stages of building started around 3100 BC, which is what I remembered as it being, just coming into the third millennium BC. Yeah. Obviously, that's more like probably more perishable structures, and they might be doing similar shapes or things, but they're not doing these big stones at that point. But if we consider, I mean, Stonehenge is clearly, it is towards the end of this kind of megalithic tradition.
Yeah.
Bell Beaker folk going on in time don't really do megaliths the same way, do they?
No.
They do things like, actually, I've been to, well, I don't know if it's Bell Beaker specifically, but it's a Middle Bronze Age or Early Bronze Age, not even a circle, but like a kind of stone arrangement, somewhere just over the border in Wales. And it's not, they're not big stones though. It's a what do you call it? It's like concrete, basically. It's like ancient concrete that they've built these things out of, and completely different atmosphere to the whole thing. It doesn't have at all the same kind of character as the Neolithic structures. It's clearly influenced by them, but it's the difference between having, like a solid block of stone that is just stone, like an Avebury or Stanton Drew or any of those. These, you can see the little kind of pebbles and things in them, and like if you worked at it pretty lightly, I think with a chisel, you'd start cutting into it and it would disintegrate. It's not as robust a structure. Also, they might have shifted over time, but I seem to remember them being at a weird angle. There's sort of one's like that, and another one's sort of going a bit, I don't know, very curious place. I only went the once, and we thought, wow, well, this is very underwhelming compared to some of the other places that we'd seen on our journey up till that point, which were all Neolithic and impressive in terms of how big these stones are. Some of the kind of cromlech, the stones over the tops of some of those graves, if they were graves, are staggering. It's impressive looking at it. You're like, wow, okay, people moved that. It's very easy to make up a kind of geopolymer or something on the site and then to sculpt it into a pillar, and then that's that.
Yeah.
It's much harder to get a blue stone down from Wales or wherever they came from.
Yeah.
But I'll take your point in the long run anyway, that there's integration between the incoming Bell Beaker mode and the by then native Neolithic mode in all throughout Britain and Ireland, but in the case of Ireland, and it seems in Western Scotland as well, there might be more of a tendency to adopt the native mode on the part of Bell Beaker groups coming in. So that then goes into, it's basically this kind of like, oh, you're not as native as we are kind of thing, when they're both as foreign as each other, to be honest.
Yeah.
But they're doing things slightly different.
Yeah.
God, the shit that we disagree on, right?
I mean, yeah, just that it all. I'm not going to even get it. Well, the Irish thinking they're Iberian sort of thing, but I mean that could be because of that. That could
for
be...
another time, Connor.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't want to go back to Ireland for a while after this, but
Yep. Fair enough. So, shall we end there?
Yeah.
Cool.
I think we can. I think we've done a good run on all of this. Like I said, I might try and do something a little bit like this again in the future, but obviously on a different set of things. Depends on if I find anything like this. I mean, the basic point of it all is that it's for people to think of mythology in terms of the sources that we've got, when those sources come from, and what kind of world people were living in when they wrote that stuff down. Because all the mythology that we've got for British and Irish places, for the Gauls, even however little we've got for them, for Germanics and everything like that, and for Baltislavs, all of it, pretty much all of it, other than little inscriptions and things, is post-Christian. And sure, I think you can get a lot of legitimate information from there. But clearly, in the case of this Cadmoi Chura text, there's room for considering that contemporary issues might have affected the expression of these mythemes, which makes sense because it's what we do today and it's what we've done for the past millennium. And we've got reliable documentary evidence to that process happening. If you want to read, I don't know if Shakespeare's left any letters or anything like that, but there's going to be playwrights and authors through the whole of the past, at least the past 500 years, who will be talking about their creative process, the influences that they take from biblical sources, pre-Christian sources, other cultures. I mean, people are doing sort of Mohammedan fan fictions from the 1500s on, or maybe even earlier, because it's exotic and it's interesting, and that'll grab people's attention, and that means that you earn your bread and butter as a playwright, an author, or in the earlier contexts, maybe a songster, a troubadour, a skald, or a bard, or whatever the terminology is. I think this is what we've always done. Is reimagine our stories and reimagine ourselves in the process to try and give ourselves a sort of a better direction in life relative to the circumstances that we find ourselves in, which are always going to be different from what our ancestors were facing.
Yeah, most definitely. But even then, there might still be similar themes returning, so like the rise and fall of empires and so on.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely room for... people shouldn't get me wrong. There's definitely room for argument that actually Cadmoi Chura isn't that kind of politically motivated, and that it is actually the legitimate tradition regarding Brez, and that it's actually just really, really complicated how all of these figures are supposed to be related to each other. Certainly more complicated than a lot of modern scholars and so on have thought. It could be that it's totally legit, but we don't have all the other supplementary information that would fill in all the gaps and make it all make sense together. So, there's some things that we're never going to know, I guess.
Yeah, that's... Yeah. So we could...
It's a shame, because, I mean, you and I think a lot of people come into this stuff really wanting to know, and not for the sake of being able to wheel this knowledge out and impress people or anything, but because it pertains to us and our ancestors, and it's our lore, and we'd like to know our stories, sort of what people went through and all of that. But there's a certain point beyond which you really can't, and we have to accept that. And well, we can fill in the blanks if we want, and I think that's what Tolkien was trying to do. Was in fact, actually not even fill in the blanks, just give a completely different, in a sense, a different world through which to reflect some of the moral requirements, I think, of people living today. At least that seems to be what he was trying to do with it.
Yeah. At the very least.
So yeah, long story short, let's be like Tolkien.
Yeah. I mean, at the very least, it seems like all of the genetic stuff that's coming out, like this seems to be helping quite a lot to clarify quite a few things about these stories. So when it comes to Ireland, you know, it's like, okay, we've got the Levorgavala Aaron story and we've got the genetics. They don't really match up, but we can, I suppose, have fun trying to figure out like the ways in which they do. So for, you know, just the way we were talking about who the, you know, you mentioned relating the Fomorians, for example, to the Picts, or like you know, Beaker
Yeah,
folk.
for the sake of argument.
Yeah, it's like there's definitely, I think, tracing particular motifs, you know, like give us clues and things like that. So, for example, the emphasis on growing crops versus cattle and things like that. You know, now that there's usually an assumption the Neolithic farmers were all about their crops and the, you know, the Beaker folk were all about their cattle. But we've it actually turns out that the Neolithic folk, like the later ones, were actually very much into their cattle as well. But the fact that there was still like a tradition of like raising crops, even though Ireland is not it's not really suitable for raising crops. Like the middle part is probably the best for doing that sort of thing. But like seeing, I suppose, which groups in the mythology are associated with particular things can maybe give us clues as to what they did. And that's what I suppose I find that interesting about the Fomorians, is that they were they seem to have been associated with the sea. So there's a Scottish folk tale where it talks about the princess of the Fomorians, and actually in that tale the Fomorians, they're presented pretty neutrally. They're not actually like an antagonistic people. They're just the people that live under the sea. Or something like that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
So they've got some
sort of... I mean, that says quite a lot, doesn't it? If they're... I mean, that's going to be later folklore, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But still, if they're presented... I mean, actually, if they're presented neutrally in later folklore, where we've already had Christianization, which generally implies demonization, right, of all these kinds of figures, but yet they're still coming out as... And there's plenty of sort of pre-Christian looking elements in Scottish folklore that are very negatively depicted. All of your... what are they? Kelpies and Selkies and what's that horse? The water horse thing.
The Yachwishki. Yeah,
whatever it is. Yeah,
they're terrifying.
They are. I was going to say terrifying. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, if the Fomorians are being, they're like, they're not quite mermaids, but you know, they're just people. They're just people, basically. Like there's good and bad among them. That strikes me as being more realistic. Like when you're reading about Jotnard in Norse mythology, some of them are good. Some of them do good things, and they're not even really expecting any reward for it. They're just good. And okay, it might be that on the whole they're bad, as far as you know the Asti are concerned, maybe, but it's never like a wholesale thing. It's only when you start getting the later layers of mythology, especially in the Christian era, that suddenly we get suggestions, if not straight up assertions, that they're evil. To, you know, as a race they're evil, and the exceptions kind of prove the rule or something. It's like, that's not how nature works. And I dare say that that's not how our distant ancestors would have viewed things necessarily, as a dichotomy between good and evil. I think that when people start talking more about chaos versus order, that becomes a more appropriate way of distinguishing between these kinds of forces. And you can't have chaos without order. I suppose you can't have good without evil, but chaos and order is a little bit more fundamental than that.
Well,
you kind of you have to accept both.
Yeah.
There are elements that are chaotic in the world and elements that are ordered, and some elements can be chaotic, and that's fine. And some of them have to be ordered, or things become bad for people. But you're never going to get rid of chaos, and you're never going to get rid of order. So,
I mean, the thing that strikes me about those two is the good and evil thing is very much a, human-centric kind of thing. It's like, whereas the chaos and order is more nature.
Yeah. And I think that's, if we think back to Aesop's fables and that kind of stuff, humanity, a lot of the early tutelary deities, if you want to consider them like that, for lots of cultures around the world, they're not anthropomorphized. They are animals or plants that teach humanity how to live and how to treat each other and how to treat the world around them. That's coming from a time when humanity just was sort of more enmeshed in its environment, and I don't think we had as strongly kind of anthropocentric views of stuff to come up with a kind of cosmic good versus a cosmic evil. That strikes me as being the kind of stuff that you're getting in Zoroastrianism, in sort of ancient Indo-Iranian city contexts. It's a civilized kind of view. People have got their in-guard, out-guard, but very firmly separating themselves from a wild, natural, dangerous world out there. That's the chaos, and that's bad because it's uncertain and it's scary. Whereas the order is in the city, even though the criminals are in the city and the bribed guards and officials are in the city and the dodgy priests are in the city. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's good because it's safe, because it's known, because it's within the human world. They've separated themselves out like that. And we're straight back into Adam and Eve and knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and being divorced from the context into which God or the gods placed us. Cool. I'm kind of happy to end that there if you are.
Yep. Let's do that.
Good. I really enjoyed that. That was great.
Yeah. Well, is there any questions in the chat on YouTube or anything like that? Nope.
Let's have a look. Not that I can see.
Okay.
Although our mine's not up to date. Hang on, let me see how far it goes. No, not that I can see.
Okay, that's fine. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Yeah, it's been a good one.
Much appreciated. We will see you in the next one at some point.
Aye. Okay, well, yeah. Take care, everyone. See you later, Alex.
See you, man.